All right, guys, so it appears like we have the return of a non-shitty Elizabeth Warren. Of course, everybody knows, at least on the left, that Elizabeth Warren torched her credibility when she stabbed Bernie in the back and twisted the knife. Basically lied about him or misrepresented a story about him, where trying to imply that he's some sort of misogynist, sexist, maybe even bordering on abusive type character or like cult leader type character. Because remember, the arguments were like, oh my God, the Bernie bros are so extreme and they're so crazy. And look at how they harass women all around the internet. Look at how they're calling Elizabeth Warren a snake. Yeah, you want to know why people were calling her a snake? Because she's a snake. Because she stabbed her friend in the back, twisted the knife, and torpedoed his campaign in an attempt to effectively help Joe Biden, and then got nothing even in return from Joe Biden. Remember that? She was doing it because she wanted to become Treasury Secretary or have some high-ranking position in the administration, and she didn't even get that. So she sold out and got Dickie McGeezax for it. And of course, remember, when all the corporate Democrats dropped out and endorsed Joe Biden at the last minute, what did Elizabeth Warren do? Stayed in the race to siphon some votes from Bernie. So this is the Elizabeth Warren that has been front of mind for everybody on the left for a very, very long time, and understandably so. I will never forgive her for what she did in 2020, and I recommend you never forgive her either. However, having said that, we of course have to be objective, and I got to give you guys the news. I got to give you guys the facts, and if the facts are inconvenient, so be it. But here we're talking about her doing something kind of decent. So there's two things I want to show you here. Let's start with this one from Ken Klippenstein. He's tweeting out a CNN clip. Senator Warren on Fed Chair Powell's remark that Fed policy will, quote, bring some pain to households and businesses. What he calls some pain means putting people out of work. So she's going to go after the Fed here because the Fed is not even really hiding the fact that they're trying to induce a recession to get inflation under control. So let's watch and we'll break it down.
Ask more broadly about the economy. The Fed chair, Jerome Powell, signaled this week.
Make it a little bit louder here.
Forceful and rapid action on inflation. It could be coming by keeping interest rates high for some time. Listen to what he said.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses. These are the unfortunate costs of reducing inflation.
Is raising interest rates again a mistake? And how likely do you think it is that a recession is coming if the interest rates continue to go up?
I just want to translate what Jerome Powell just said. What he calls some pain means putting people out of work, shutting down small businesses because the cost of money goes up, because the interest rates go up.
So it sounds like you do think it's a mistake to raise interest rates again.
I am very worried about this because the causes of inflation, things like the fact that COVID is still shutting down parts of the economy around the world, that we still have supply chain kinks, that we still have a war going on in Ukraine that drives up the cost of energy, and that we still have these giant corporations that are engaging in price gouging. There is nothing in raising the interest rates, nothing in Jerome Powell's tool bag that deals directly with those. And he has admitted as much in congressional hearings when I've asked him about it. Do you know what's worse than high prices and a strong economy? It's high prices and millions of people out of work. I'm very worried that the Fed is going to tip this economy into recession.
That is 1,000,000,000% correct. Every part of that is correct. So look, the idea of let's raise interest rates to try to get inflation under control, I understand where that perspective comes from. And in certain situations, it might even be the right thing to do. But the point Elizabeth Warren is making, and I think this is absolutely correct, is this is not the solution this particular time, because the inflation is not brought about simply by the big government spending. Does that account for some of the inflation? I'm sure it does. But all the other factors that she listed there are more important with the current inflation that we're seeing. And if you raise interest rates, does that do anything about the supply chain being messed up? Because one of the key causes of inflation is that the supply chain is messed up. That doesn't do anything to address that. Does that do anything to address the price gouging that corporations are doing? And by the way, this is not just an opinion from Kyle Kulinski or Elizabeth Warren. This is something we've covered on the show in detail. There was a great Business Insider article on it, among others, where it listed, hey, here's what's happening. The corporations are using the media panic over inflation to use that as an excuse to raise prices for things that aren't even experiencing inflation. So they're just price gouging and pretending, oh no, this is all these price hikes are about inflation. And you could see it's reflected in the data. The corporate profits shoot up. So if you're not addressing that, if you're not addressing monopoly power, for example, then, you're not really tackling the inflation this time around at its core. I don't want to be too flippant with it, because I do think that raising the interest rates will impact inflation to one extent or another, but it's not the cure-all that they think it is. And then, by the way, like she's saying, even if it was the so-called cure-all for inflation, there's a trade-off being made here. And the argument is we would rather have price stability than low unemployment. So, and people have come out and admit this. Larry Summers, the neoliberal economist, came out and admitted this. We need inflation to be minimum 6% in order to get price stability back. And this is something, there's no debating it, there's no contemplating it, there's no discussing the upsides and the downsides of it. They're just like, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. And Biden is on board with this. Biden is, agreeing with this approach that the Fed is taking. I think maybe not even realizing how that hurts his electoral prospects, because if unemployment shoots up too much, then of course there's going to be a backlash at the ballot box, right? And Elizabeth Warren is one of the only politicians that I see talking about it. And she might be one of the only politicians who actually understands what's going on here with the Fed and with inflation and with interest rates. So that's a scary place to be. If I were Biden, if I were the Democrats, I would watch out, because there's all these things now that are lining up on the Democratic side to help them for the midterm election that's upcoming. We've been through the list 1,000 times, but the overturning of Roe versus Wade and the Republicans going super extreme, not just on abortion, but literally voting against gay marriage, 157 of them, 195 of them voting against the right to contraception. The list of victories the Democrats have had recently legislatively, like the 15% corporate tax rate in the IRA, these things are a big deal. The PACT Act, the CHIPS Act, these things are a big deal. We're onshoring jobs now and not offshoring them. These things are a really big deal. But it's certainly, all this enthusiasm can be reeled in if you have a massive spike in unemployment and a recession. And the fact of the matter is, they are actively trying to create a recession. That's what they're trying to do. So, I don't want to see all of this goodwill squandered. Joe Biden's student loan debt elimination is stronger than I thought it would be. And so here's the thing, guys. If Joe Biden and the Democrats did all these things that are half decent for once, and then they get wiped out at the ballot box in the midterm election, what lesson are they going to take from that? I'll tell you what lesson they're going to take from it. The one they always take, which is, the problem here is we went too far left wing. Now we need to be even more right wing. All that stuff we did, like the student loan debt elimination, it's not good, because the voters didn't reward us. And as of this moment right now, that is not the lesson they're taking, because Biden, seeing how this is making him more popular and his numbers are going up, are actually leaning in. He's leaning into the attacks on Republicans. He's leaning into the half-decent shit that he did. I would hate to see them go in the other direction if they get wiped out in the midterms and they wrongly blame it on the half-decent things they did. And so this is a warning from Elizabeth Warren, and she's 100% correct on this front. So it's not a good situation that we're looking at right now. So anyway, let me show you this part as well, because this is super important. Elizabeth Warren introduces bill to ban anti-union right-to-work laws. This is fascinating. So here's what they say in Truth Out. Senator Elizabeth Warren has introduced a bill that would ban states from implementing so-called right-to-work laws, which suppress union activity and make it more difficult for workers to form unions. The bill, which was previously introduced in 2017 and 2020, is known as the Protecting Workers and Improving Labor Standards Act. It would rescind right-to-work laws, which are currently in place in 27 states and Guam. that prohibit unions from collecting dues from non-union members who are still covered under a union contract. So let me pause and talk about this here for a second. They give workers the ability to opt out of a union while still experiencing all the benefits and protections of that union. Higher pay, more vacation time, etc. And so basically it allows free riding. And the idea in the long run is, hey, all these people will opt out of paying their dues, and eventually you starve the union to death. And when the union is starved to death, then you turn around and you could lower wages across the board, and you could lower benefits across the board. And so it's very, very Weasley. And I like what Tom Hartman calls them. He says, by the way, he's wonderful. I have one of his books right here. He calls it right to work for less laws, because that's what happens in these right to work laws. By the way, this was a great book. It's called Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class and What We Can Do About It. Geez, this had to come out, mid-2000s, something like that. But it's a phenomenal book. He's a great author as well. But anyway, it's right to work for less. And so it's funny because it's the same old Republican trick. Posture like you're for the working class, but fundamentally your policy prescriptions are against the working class. And that's what the right to work stuff is. They try to frame it like, Democrats are against your right to work, and we are for your right to work. And it's like, no, you are for people working for less money, and you want to lower wages across the board, and you want to cut benefits across the board. So I love this proposal here from Elizabeth Warren. And look, it is interesting, because when you look at some of the discussions about the direction Democrats can go after the midterms, if they hang on and if they do well and if they maybe pick up a couple seats, there are some things on the table that are very encouraging. We're going to get to a story later about Biden and the Democrats trying to do a Hail Mary to bring back the extended child tax credit. That'd be phenomenal if they did that. And then there's talk about, look, if they can pick up seats, you might be able to get to a point where you can eliminate the filibuster. Because if it's Manchin and Sinema who are the only ones who are blocking it, well, if we could just pick up a couple more seats, then you're having the conversation of, if they get rid of the filibuster, then it's all systems go. And there are already reports Biden wants to revive aspects of his Build Back Better bill. So now, of course, the major caveat in this conversation is, you don't know if there's going to be a rotating villain. You don't know if somebody like Mark Warner will step up and all of a sudden he's the person that everybody hates and he's the one who blocks all the progress, or if it'll be Chris Coons or whoever else, right? Like, that is certainly a distinct possibility. But I will say, to this extent, I did not see this the past month or so coming. I didn't see Biden and the Democrats and even Chuck Schumer handing the Republicans their ass on a silver platter and actually delivering some basic stuff. So we'll see, man. We'll see what happens. But this is, wow, weird when Elizabeth Warren drops the weird identity politics obsession and she stops stabbing the best senator in the country in the back and she just focuses on basic economic policy. It turns out she could be half decent. And this reminds me, back before all the drama with Bernie, back before Elizabeth Warren's pathetic attempt to run for president, it reminds me of how the left used to talk about her back in the day. Because remember, she was the reason why the left liked her in the first place was that she was the brainchild of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we got in the Obama years, namely because Elizabeth Warren was behind the scenes pushing for that relentlessly and not taking no for an answer. And it's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that returned $12 billion to defrauded Americans. So that is unquestionably a phenomenal thing. And she gets the credit for it. And then she sort of blew all of her credibility by doing what she did, which we all despise. It'd be good if she keeps going down this path, because this path is infinitely better. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.